The evening sun hung low over the quiet neighborhood, casting long shadows across the pavement. A light breeze moved through the trees as a 16-year-old boy walked down the sidewalk, a gym bag slung over his shoulder. He had just finished basketball practice, still sweating lightly, his hoodie pulled up to keep warm in the cooling air. It was a normal walk home, one he had taken hundreds of times before. His music played softly through one earbud, and he dribbled an invisible ball with his free hand, lost in his own world. Up ahead, the street was calm. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, and the hum of a car engine echoed faintly. Then he noticed a police car parked across the street. He didn't think much of it at first until it slowly began to move, turning onto his side of the road. He lowered the volume on his phone and glanced up. The car rolled beside him, creeping forward until the passenger window came level with where he stood. "Hey, you there," one of the officers called out. The boy turned his head, confused. "Come here a second." He stopped walking, pulling out his earbud. "Yes, sir?" he said politely. His heart started to beat a little faster, though he didn't know why. The officer in the passenger seat opened his door and stepped out, hand resting casually on his belt. "You live around here?" the officer asked, his tone sharp but controlled. "Yes, sir. Just a few blocks away," the boy replied. His voice came out quiet, almost too soft. "Mind telling us where you're coming from?" "Basketball practice," he said, pointing to the gym bag on his shoulder. "At the community center." The officer's eyes flicked over him, studying every movement. "You got some ID on you?" The boy shook his head. "No, sir. I left my wallet at home." "It's just a short walk." That answer didn't seem to sit well. The second officer got out of the car too, joining his partner. Both men were now standing just a few feet away. The boy could feel the weight of their stares pressing down on him. His palms started to sweat. He shifted his bag nervously from one shoulder to the other. "You match the description of someone we're looking for," the first officer said. "Tall, dark hoodie, black backpack." The boy blinked, not sure how to respond. I just came from practice." "You can call the coach." "Keep your hands where we can see them," the second officer interrupted. "We'll ask the questions." A lump formed in his throat. His instinct was to explain himself, to say more, but every word that tried to come out got stuck. He felt frozen, caught between fear and confusion. He wasn't sure what to do with his hands, so he held them awkwardly in front of him. He could feel his pulse pounding in his temples. The first officer's hand went to his radio. "We might have our guy," he said quietly into it. "Standing on Oak and Hillcrest." The words made the boy's stomach twist. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It felt like a trap closing in. He looked around. A few houses away, someone peeked through their window blinds. Across the street, a woman walking her dog slowed down, watching. The boy's voice came out in a tremble. "I didn't do anything, sir, please. Stay calm," one of them said, though his tone wasn't comforting. "We're just checking." He tried to steady his breathing. His mom always told him what to do if he ever got stopped. Stay polite, don't argue, don't move too quickly. He tried to remember her voice in his head, calm and firm, but it was hard to think clearly now. One of the officers stepped closer. "What's in the bag?" "My shoes and water bottle," the boy said quickly. "You can check if you want." Put the bag down slowly. He did as told, placing it gently on the ground. The officer unzipped it, rummaging through it roughly before tossing it aside. The shoes rolled out, one bouncing onto the street. The boy swallowed hard, trying not to show how shaken he was. "You live with your parents?" the first officer asked. "Yes, sir." "What's their number?" He hesitated. His phone was in his pocket, buzzing with an incoming call. He knew it was his mom. She usually called around this time to check if he was home safe. He looked down at his pocket, then back up. "My phone's ringing. It's my mom. Don't reach for it." The officer barked suddenly. The boy froze. His chest tightened. "I wasn't," he stammered. "It's just, I said don't move." He raised his hand slightly, his voice cracking. "Okay, I'm not." The tension in the air grew thick. The dog walker across the street pulled out her phone and began recording. A car slowed as it drove by, the driver watching from behind the wheel. The boy felt everyone's eyes on him, but none of them could help him. He could feel tears burning at the corners of his eyes. He tried to blink them away. He wanted to disappear, to wake up and find this was all a bad dream. His knees felt weak, but he forced himself to stand still. One of the officers circled around him slowly, as if waiting for him to make the wrong move. The other kept his hand near his holster, fingers twitching slightly. They spoke to each other in low tones, words he couldn't make out. Minutes dragged on like hours. The boy's phone finally stopped ringing. Silence filled the space between them, except for the sound of his breathing. Then the radio on the officer's shoulder crackled to life again. "We have units nearby," a voice said through the static. "Sending backup, backup." The word made his heart drop. He wasn't sure why they needed more officers. He hadn't done anything wrong. But to them, that didn't seem to matter. A second later, the officer looked at him again. "Turn around," he said. "What? Why?" "Turn around, now." The boy's throat tightened. "Sir, please, I didn't do anything." "Don't make this harder than it has to be." He felt tears start to spill down his cheeks. His body trembled, but he turned slowly as told, his hand still raised halfway. The air felt heavy, pressing on his chest. He wanted to scream, but he couldn't find his voice. Then from the distance came the faint sound of another car engine. It was moving fast. The boy didn't notice it at first, but the officers did. They glanced toward the noise, hands still hovering near their weapons. The boy's phone buzzed again in his pocket. His mother was calling back. At that very moment, miles away, his mother sat behind the wheel of her car, speeding down the road. She had called him 3 times already, and each time there was no answer. Her gut told her something was wrong. Years of training had sharpened her instincts, but this feeling was different, deeper. It wasn't just worry, it was fear. She opened the family location app on her phone and saw his dot blinking near Oak Street. She knew that route. She drove it every day when she picked him up from school. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. Her heart pounded with every passing second. Back on the street, the officers stood near the boy, waiting for backup. The tension still thick. The sound of the approaching car grew louder now. The boy tried to glance over his shoulder, but one of the officers snapped, "Keep your head straight." He did. But inside he was praying, silently, desperately. For help, for safety, for someone to believe him. The car came into view at the end of the block, turning sharply onto the street. The tires screeched slightly as it came closer. The officer's hands twitched again, not sure what to expect. The boy's heart jumped when he saw it. He recognized the shape, the color, the way it moved. Hope flickered for the first time since this started. The car was still a few houses away when it stopped abruptly. The door flew open and a woman stepped out, moving quickly, her face set with determination. The officers didn't know who she was yet, but they were about to find out, and the boy, still trembling, whispered under his breath, "Mom." The car came to a stop just a few feet away from where the boy stood. Before anyone could react, the door opened and his mother stepped out, her eyes wide with panic and focus. She had driven faster than she should have, following the blinking dot on her phone, not knowing what she would find when she arrived. But the sight before her made her chest tighten. A police cruiser, 2 officers, and her son standing in the street with his hands raised. She slammed the car door shut and started walking quickly toward them. The officers turned, startled by the sudden movement. One of them raised his hand slightly, signaling her to stop. "Ma'am, stay back," he ordered. His voice carried authority, but she didn't stop. She didn't even slow down. Her eyes were fixed on her son. His face was pale, his eyes red and full of fear. He looked so small standing there, his bag on the ground, his shoes scattered on the pavement. Her heart broke at the sight, but her training kicked in before her emotions could take over. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her badge, holding it high so they could see it clearly. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," she said firmly, her voice sharp enough to cut through the tension. "That's my son." For a moment, no one spoke. The officers froze, exchanging uncertain looks. The boy turned his head slightly, his eyes wide with disbelief. Relief washed through him, but fear still lingered. He didn't know how this was going to end. "Ma'am, we were just—" One officer started, his tone suddenly shifting from confident to cautious. "You were just what?" she interrupted. Her voice stayed calm, but there was a fire in her tone. "Pointing your weapons at a child walking home from practice." "Ma'am, please," the other officer said, his voice tight. "We were responding to a call." He matched a description. She stepped closer, her badge still visible. "A description? What description? That he's tall? Wearing a hoodie? Carrying a bag?" The officer hesitated, unable to find the right words. The mother turned to her son, reaching for him. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He nodded, though his hands were still trembling. The small crowd watching from across the street had grown larger now. Some were filming. Others whispered among themselves. The tension was shifting. The power dynamic had changed the moment she showed her badge. The officers looked uncomfortable, unsure what to do next. "Put your hands down," she told her son gently. "It's okay." He lowered them slowly, his breathing uneven. She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, steadying him. "You're safe now," she whispered. One of the officers cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. "Ma'am, we didn't know. You didn't need to know," she said sharply. "You just needed to follow proper procedure. You approach, you ask questions, you observe. You don't escalate without reason." He looked down, his face flushing with embarrassment. The other officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the crowd. They both knew they had gone too far, but pride kept them from admitting it aloud. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "Do you even realize how scared he must have been?" she asked quietly, her tone softening just slightly. "You see a kid in a hoodie and think danger. But that's my child. A student, an athlete, a good kid. You didn't see any of that." The silence hung heavy in the air. No one spoke. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees and the faint hum of traffic in the distance. Then a voice crackled through the officers' radios. "Backup is arriving at your location." Both men reached for their radios, quickly responding that the situation was under control. A few minutes later, another patrol car turned onto the street, its lights flashing briefly before turning off. Two more officers stepped out, scanning the scene. One of them recognized the woman immediately. "Agent, everything okay here?" he asked, his tone respectful. "Yes," she said firmly. "It's under control." She gave a brief nod, and he seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. The newcomer stepped back, staying near their car, letting her handle it. The mother looked back at the two original officers. "You owe him an apology," she said simply. The older officer's jaw tightened. He hesitated, then looked at the boy. "Sorry, son," he said quietly. "We were just doing our job." The boy didn't respond. He didn't know what to say. He just wanted to go home. She nodded slowly. "Then do it better next time," she said. Her tone wasn't cruel, just steady and honest. She turned to her son. "Let's go." He picked up his bag and followed her to the car. His legs felt weak, but the moment he sat down, a wave of relief washed over him. His mom closed the driver's door and sat beside him, gripping the steering wheel tightly. For a few seconds, she didn't say anything. She just breathed, trying to process everything. Her son finally broke the silence. "I thought they were gonna..." He stopped himself, his voice shaking. "I know," she said softly, reaching over and squeezing his hand. "I know." He stared out the window, watching the police cars fade in the distance. His hands were still trembling, but the warmth of his mother's hand grounded him. The silence between them was heavy, filled with all the words they couldn't say. As they drove home, she kept glancing at him from time to time. Every time she saw his face in the dim streetlight, her chest tightened. She had seen dangerous situations in her line of work, but this felt different. This was personal. This was her son. She thought about the look on his face when she arrived, how frightened he had been, how still he stood, afraid to move. It broke something inside her. No amount of training or experience could have prepared her for that. At a red light, she reached over and brushed a tear from his cheek. "You did everything right," she said. "You stayed calm. I'm proud of you." He didn't respond right away. When he finally did, his voice was quiet. "I didn't know what to do. I froze." "That's okay," she said gently. "You're safe now." They drove in silence for a while. The sky had turned darker, the city lights flickering to life. As they pulled into their driveway, she turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. "Mom?" he said softly. "Yeah? Do you think they'll get in trouble?" She sighed, staring straight ahead. "Maybe. I'll make sure what happened tonight is reported. But more than that, I want them to learn something from it. They need to see people, not stereotypes." He nodded, though his eyes were still distant. "It's not fair." "I know," she whispered. "It isn't." Inside the house, the familiar warmth of home wrapped around them. She made him sit on the couch while she grabbed him a glass of water. He drank quietly, his hands still a little shaky. She sat beside him, her arm around his shoulders. "You can talk to me about anything, okay?" she said softly. "You don't have to hold it in." He nodded again. "I just keep seeing it over and over. The way they looked at me." She pulled him closer, resting her chin on his head. "You're not alone. We'll get through this." Outside, the night was calm again. The sound of crickets filled the air, mixing with the faint hum of distant cars. But inside the house, the weight of what had happened still lingered. Later that night, after he went to bed, she sat in her home office, typing a report. Her hands moved quickly, her expression serious. Every detail of the event went into her notes. Every word, every movement, every mistake. She knew the right people to contact, the right channels to follow. She wasn't just a mother tonight. She was an agent with a purpose. But as she finished her report and closed her laptop, she looked toward her son's room. A faint light from his lamp glowed under the door. She walked quietly to his room and opened the door a crack. He was lying awake, staring at the ceiling. "Can't sleep?" she asked gently. He shook his head. She walked in and sat at the edge of his bed. "It's okay to be scared," she said softly. "What happened tonight shouldn't have happened. But I promise you, I'll make sure it doesn't happen again. Not to you, not to anyone else if I can help it." He turned his head to look at her. "You mean it?" She smiled faintly. "Always." He reached for her hand and she squeezed it. The fear in his eyes hadn't fully faded, but in that moment he felt safe again. As she turned off the light and closed the door behind her, she knew the fight wasn't over. But tonight her son was home, alive and in her arms, and that was enough for now. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window, painting soft lines across the living room floor. The boy sat quietly at the table, stirring his cereal without eating. His eyes were tired. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed them, flashes of the night before came back. The officers' voices, the fear in his chest, the sound of his mother shouting his name. It all replayed in his head like a loop that wouldn't stop. His mother walked in, dressed for work but looking heavier than usual. The sharpness in her eyes from last night was still there, but now it mixed with sadness. She paused by the counter, watching him for a moment before speaking. "Did you get any sleep?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "A little," she sighed, taking a seat across from him. "I didn't either." She glanced at her phone. "I filed the report early this morning. I sent it to Internal Affairs and the local chief's office." He nodded but didn't say anything. His spoon clinked against the bowl as he pushed his cereal around. "Will they do anything?" he asked quietly. "They'll have to," she said. "I'll make sure of it." For a while they just sat in silence. The clock ticked softly on the wall. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's dog barked. It was a normal morning, but everything felt different. The house didn't feel as safe as it used to. Finally, she spoke again. "You don't have to go to school today if you don't want to. Take a day to rest." He looked up at her. "No, I want to go. I don't want people thinking something's wrong." She studied his face for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, but if you feel uncomfortable, call me anytime." He gave a small nod, and she reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "You're stronger than you think," she said softly. Later that morning, she drove him to school. The streets looked the same as always, but he saw them differently now. Every police car he passed made his stomach tighten. Every flash of blue uniform made his pulse quicken. When they pulled up in front of the school, he hesitated before opening the door. "You'll be okay," she said gently. He nodded, though he didn't really believe it. He got out of the car and walked toward the entrance, keeping his head down. His classmates greeted him, but he could feel their eyes studying him. Word had already spread. People had seen the video. Someone from the crowd had posted it online, and overnight it had started to circulate. By lunchtime, almost everyone knew. A few friends came up to him, trying to be supportive. "Man, that was crazy," one said. "I saw the clip. You okay?" He forced a small smile. "Yeah, I'm fine." But he wasn't. Inside, he was still shaking. Every hallway felt like it was closing in. Every time someone looked at him for too long, he wondered what they were thinking. Some people looked at him with sympathy. Others just looked away, uncomfortable. Meanwhile, at her office, his mother sat in a meeting with her supervisor. Her badge lay on the table, her notepad filled with details. "You handled the situation correctly," her supervisor said. "But this is going to get attention. It's already online." She nodded, though her mind was elsewhere. "It's not about attention," she said quietly. "It's about accountability." Her supervisor sighed. "I understand. But be careful. Things like this can get political fast." She met his eyes. "I'm not trying to make a statement. I'm trying to protect my son." He leaned back in his chair. "And you should. But just remember, once a story like this spreads, it's no longer just yours." She didn't respond. She knew he was right, but she also knew she couldn't stay silent. The image of her son standing there with his hands up burned in her memory. She couldn't let it fade without meaning. Back at school, the boy sat in his last class of the day, staring out the window. He didn't hear half of what the teacher said. His mind drifted, lost in what happened. But then something unexpected happened. His phone buzzed. It was a message from a reporter. They wanted to talk about the incident. He frowned, confused and nervous. How did they even get his number? He didn't reply, but the message made his stomach churn. He wanted the whole thing to disappear, but it seemed like it was just getting started. When school ended, he walked outside to find his mom waiting for him. He got into the car silently. "How was your day?" she asked. He shrugged. "Okay." Then after a pause, he added, "People know." She glanced at him. "I figured they would. The video's spreading fast." "I didn't want anyone to see it," he said softly. "I just wanted to forget." "I know," she said. "But sometimes stories like this have to be seen for people to understand what's wrong." He looked out the window, not sure if that made him feel better or worse. "I didn't ask for this," he whispered. She sighed. "I know, but maybe this will change something, even if it's small." When they got home, she received a call from the local police department. The chief wanted to meet with her in person. She agreed, though she could feel her pulse quicken. It wasn't going to be an easy conversation. That evening, she drove to the station. The air inside felt heavy, filled with the smell of coffee and paperwork. The chief met her in his office, a tired-looking man with kind eyes but a careful tone. "Agent, I want to start by saying I'm sorry for what happened," he said. "It shouldn't have escalated the way it did." "Thank you," she replied calmly. "But I'm not here for apologies. I want to know what steps you're taking to make sure this doesn't happen again." He nodded slowly. "We've started an internal review. The officers involved are being questioned. I've also requested additional bias training for the department." She listened, her expression unreadable. "That's a start," she said. "But it's not enough. Training only matters if people take it seriously." He sighed. "I know. I wish I could promise change overnight, but you and I both know it doesn't work that way." She leaned forward slightly. "Then I'll make sure it does. I've seen too many cases like this in my career. It's different when it's your own child. I won't let this fade away quietly." The chief nodded again, realizing she meant every word. "Understood," he said. "We'll stay in touch." As she left the station, she felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. The fight ahead wouldn't be simple, but she wasn't backing down. When she got home, her son was sitting on the couch scrolling through his phone. "It's everywhere now," he said quietly. "People are commenting. Some say the cops were just doing their job. Others say it was wrong." She sat beside him. "People will always have opinions," she said softly. "What matters is the truth." He put the phone down. "What if people start treating me differently?" She looked at him with gentle eyes. "Then they were never seeing you for who you really are. The people who matter won't change." He leaned back, resting his head against the couch. "I just want to be normal again." She smiled sadly. "Normal might take a little time, but we'll get there." The next few days passed in a blur. The story kept spreading. News vans parked on their street. Reporters called the house wanting interviews. She declined most of them, trying to protect her son's privacy. But inside, she knew the story was bigger than them now. One afternoon, as she came home from work, she found a small letter in the mailbox. It was handwritten, no return address. She opened it carefully. Inside was a short note. "Thank you for standing up. My son went through the same thing last year. No one believed us. Seeing your story gave us hope." She read it twice, her throat tightening. She folded the letter neatly and slipped it into a drawer. It wasn't just about her son anymore. It was about every parent who had ever felt that fear. That night they sat on the porch together, watching the sky fade into shades of orange and purple. The air was calm. For the first time in days, there was quiet. "Do you wish it never happened?" he asked suddenly. She thought for a long moment. "Yes," she said honestly. "But since it did, I want it to mean something." He nodded slowly. "Me too." A small smile touched her lips. "Then maybe that's how we start healing." They sat in silence again, listening to the wind. The world outside was still full of noise, still spinning with opinions and headlines, but for now, on that porch, it was just the two of them, a mother and her son, trying to find peace in a world that hadn't given them any the night before. The crowd stood frozen as the car came to a sudden stop near the flashing red and blue lights. The sound of tires screeching on the pavement turned every head. The door flung open, and a woman stepped out with a speed that made the air around her feel tense. She wasn't just any mother rushing to her child. Her voice carried authority, her movements sharp and deliberate. The two officers, who seconds ago had their hands near their belts, paused as she flashed a badge that gleamed under the streetlight. She spoke firmly, her tone cutting through the noise. "Step back. I'm his mother, FBI." Her voice didn't shake, but her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She saw her son standing there, hands raised, fear written all over his face. That image alone almost broke her composure, but she held it together. Years of training taught her how to stay calm under pressure, and right now that training was the only thing keeping her from losing control. The officers froze, unsure of what to do. One of them, the taller one, tried to regain his authority. "Ma'am, please stay back. We were conducting an investigation." "An investigation?" she interrupted sharply. "On what grounds?" "You've got a minor here, hands up, surrounded, and no probable cause." Her eyes darted between them, steady and cold. The younger officer looked down, uncertain. The other one shifted his stance, realizing he was no longer in control of this scene. Her son slowly lowered his hands as she gave him a small nod. He wanted to run to her, but she motioned for him to stay still for now. The air was thick with tension. The crowd that had gathered fell silent, waiting to see what would happen next. Phones were still recording, every second captured in shaky hands. The officer stammered, We got a call about a robbery suspect matching his description." He was walking alone, acting nervous. She looked at him like she had heard that line 100 times before. "Acting nervous?" "He's a teenager surrounded by two armed men in the dark. That's not suspicion, that's fear." Her voice stayed steady, but her anger was rising beneath the surface. She took a step closer, standing between her son and the officers now. A barrier made of both love and authority. She turned to the crowd. "Did anyone see him do anything suspicious?" A few heads shook. One man spoke up softly. "He was just walking home." Didn't even talk to anyone. The silence that followed was heavy. The officers seemed smaller now, their earlier confidence gone. The mother reached into her jacket, pulling out her credentials more clearly this time. "I want your badge numbers," she said, her tone colder now. They hesitated, exchanging glances, but eventually gave them. She wrote them down in her phone with steady hands. "You should have thought twice before profiling a kid who did nothing wrong," she said quietly, more to herself than to them. Her son finally took a step toward her, and she turned, wrapping her arm around his shoulders protectively. He leaned into her, still shaking. "Mom," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I didn't do anything." "I know," she said softly, pulling him closer. "You don't have to explain. It's over now." But even as she said that, she knew it wasn't really over. The damage had been done, the fear, the humiliation, the helplessness. Those things didn't fade easily. The taller officer tried to regain control of the conversation. "Ma'am, we were just doing our job. We had to make sure." She looked him straight in the eye. "Your job is to protect, not to intimidate children because of how they look. You want to talk about procedure? Let's talk about it downtown." He swallowed hard, realizing how serious she was. The younger one finally spoke, his voice low. "We're sorry, ma'am. We didn't know." "You shouldn't have to know who someone's mother is to treat them with respect," she replied calmly. That line hit hard. Even the crowd murmured in agreement. She took her son's bag from the ground and placed her hand on his back, guiding him toward the car. Before getting in, she turned one last time. "I'll be in touch with your department supervisor by morning." The drive home was quiet for the first few minutes. The boy stared out the window, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. His mother kept glancing at him, her mind racing. She wanted to ask 100 questions, what they said to him, how long it went on, but she didn't. She knew he needed a moment to breathe. Finally, he spoke. "I thought they were going to—" He couldn't finish the sentence. She reached over and gently placed her hand on his arm. "You did everything right," she said softly. "You stayed calm. I'm proud of you." He turned to her, his voice cracking. "But why me, Mom?" "I was just walking." That question cut deep. She took a slow breath before answering. "Because sometimes people make judgments before they know the truth. And that's something we have to change, one step at a time." When they got home, the house felt different, quieter, heavier. She made him tea, the way she always did when he was upset as a kid. They sat on the couch and she finally asked, "Tell me everything from the start." He explained how he was walking home, how they pulled up, how one officer kept his hand near his belt. His voice shook as he spoke, but she let him take his time. When he finished, she sat back, her face calm but her eyes fierce. "They'll answer for this," she said simply. But her son shook his head. "I just want to forget it," he said quietly. "I don't want people to see the videos online. I don't want to be that story." She understood. He didn't want pity or attention. He just wanted to feel normal again. She nodded, her tone softer now. "All right. We'll handle it quietly. But I need you to know what happened tonight wasn't your fault." Not for a second he nodded, but his eyes stayed down. The weight of what happened still sat heavy on his shoulders. She watched him for a long moment, realizing that even with all her training, all her authority, she couldn't shield him from everything. Later that night, after he went to bed, she sat at her desk with her laptop open. She began typing up a detailed report, every moment replaying in her mind. Each word was careful, professional, but behind every line was a mother's pain. She knew she had to make sure this didn't happen again, to her son or anyone else's. As she finished, she looked at a framed photo on her desk of her son when he was younger, grinning with missing front teeth. It brought tears to her eyes. That little boy had grown up too fast tonight. She closed her laptop, turned off the light, and sat in silence for a while, the sound of the clock ticking softly in the background. Outside, the city was quiet, but her thoughts weren't. She kept seeing the flashing lights, hearing the officer's voice, feeling the fear in her son's eyes. She promised herself then that this moment wouldn't just end as another sad story. She would make sure something changed. As she went to check on her son one last time before sleeping, she found him still awake, staring at the ceiling. When he saw her, he whispered, "Mom, you came just in time." She smiled faintly and sat beside him. "I'll always come when you need me," she said softly, brushing his hair back. "Always." He closed his eyes and she stayed there until his breathing steadied. In the quiet darkness, she realized that no matter how strong or trained she was, nothing in the world could ever compare to a mother's instinct to protect her child. And tonight, that instinct had made all the difference. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains, painting soft patterns on the living room floor. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock. The boy sat on the couch, a blanket draped over his shoulders. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, the flashing lights and raised voices replayed in his mind. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was confusion, anger, and something deeper he couldn't name. His mother entered the room, still in her work clothes from the night before. She had barely rested, too. There were dark circles under her eyes, but her posture was steady, her face calm. She carried 2 cups of coffee, one for herself, one of warm milk for him. She set them down gently on the table. "You okay?" she asked quietly. He nodded, but she could tell he wasn't. He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I just keep thinking about it," he said. "Like, what if you hadn't come when you did?" She took a slow breath, choosing her words carefully. "I don't like to think about that," she said softly. "What matters is I did come. You're safe." He looked down at his hands. "I keep thinking about the way they looked at me, Mom. Like they already decided who I was before they even asked me anything." Her heart ached hearing that. She sat beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "That look says more about them than it ever could about you. But I know that doesn't make it easier." He nodded slowly. There was a long silence between them, comfortable yet heavy. Outside, the world went on as if nothing had happened. Cars passed, birds sang, and neighbors walked their dogs. But for them, everything felt different. After a moment, she stood up and grabbed her briefcase from the counter. "I have to go in for a few hours," she said. "I'm filing an official complaint. I also need to meet with the department chief." He looked up quickly. "You're really doing that?" She gave a small smile. "You think I wouldn't?" He hesitated. "I don't want to make it worse for you." She shook her head. "This isn't about me. It's about making sure this doesn't happen again. To you or to someone else's kid. This time they stopped when I showed up. But what about the next kid whose mom can't?" He looked down, understanding but still unsure. "Can I come?" She thought for a moment. "Not today, but soon. You'll have your say, too." She left soon after, her badge clipped firmly to her jacket. The drive to the police department was quiet, but her mind wasn't. She replayed the scene in her head, the trembling in her son's voice, the fear in his eyes. It fueled her determination. She knew the system, knew how to navigate it. She wasn't going to let this disappear into silence. At the station, she met with the police chief, a calm but wary man who had already seen the footage spreading online. He greeted her politely, offering coffee she didn't take. She laid out the facts step by step. Her voice never rose, but every word carried weight. These officers failed to follow proper procedure, she said firmly. They detained a minor without cause, escalated without threat, and drew unnecessary attention to an innocent child. That's unacceptable. The chief listened, nodding. You're right, he admitted quietly. The footage is difficult to watch. I'll ensure an internal review is opened immediately. She looked at him steadily. I'll be watching that process closely, she said. Not as an agent, but as a mother. When she left the building, she didn't feel victory, just resolve. She knew change didn't happen in one meeting or even one report, but it had to start somewhere. Back home, her son was sitting at the kitchen table drawing. He had always loved to sketch. It helped him calm down. Today, he was sketching the view outside the window. A quiet street, trees swaying, a couple walking their dog. Simple, peaceful. But his hand trembled slightly as he worked. When his mother returned, he looked up. How did it go? He asked. She set her bag down and smiled faintly. It went the way it should. They're reviewing everything. I made sure they know this won't just go away. He nodded, then hesitated. People at school probably saw the video already, he said quietly. Someone from the neighborhood posted it. She paused, realizing this was another part of the fallout she couldn't stop. If they ask, tell them the truth, she said gently. You didn't do anything wrong, he sighed. I know. I just don't want to be that kid everyone whispers about. She sat beside him again. Then let them whisper. Eventually they'll see what kind of person you are. You'll define yourself, not that video, not their words. That evening, as the sun set, they went for a walk together, the same route he had taken the night before. He was nervous at first, but she stayed close, walking beside him. A few neighbors waved from their porches, offering kind looks. Some even said they were glad he was okay. The world wasn't all bad, she reminded herself. There were still people who cared. As they walked, the boy asked, Do you think those officers learned anything from it? She thought about it for a moment. I hope so, she said. Sometimes people don't change until they're forced to face what they did wrong. Maybe last night will make them think twice before acting on fear instead of facts. He nodded slowly, looking down at his shoes. You know, I used to think stuff like that only happened in other places. I didn't think it could happen to me. She gave a small, sad smile. I used to think that too. But life has a way of reminding us we still have work to do. Later that night, they sat together watching a movie, trying to feel normal again. There was laughter between scenes, quiet moments of peace. But every so often, she'd catch him staring off, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. She didn't push him. Healing would take time. Over the next few weeks, the story gained attention online. Local news covered it briefly, focusing on how a mother's quick action may have prevented a tragedy. Comments poured in, some supportive, some angry, some just tired of hearing the same story repeated. She tried not to read too much of it, but her son saw enough to know that the world wasn't simple. One afternoon, his school principal called her in. The meeting was brief but sincere. They discussed how to support him, to make sure he felt safe and respected. The principal promised to address any teasing or whispers. She appreciated it, even if she knew kids could be cruel no matter what adults said.